really think about so-called counterfactuality of your career. One heuristic I have is close my eyes and pretend I never existed on the planet. And then really try to think about what would the world look like if I didn't exist compared to what it looks like now. So some people will realize that somebody would replace them if they didn't exist. Probably they're just doing a role that many other people could do. And other people will close their eyes and realize that they're very special in their role, and so maybe they should stay where they are. So for those lucky enough to be able to switch jobs and move around, I think this can be a good model, like make yourself replaceable and then go on and do the next thing where you're not replaceable so that you're making a difference again.
Devon, welcome to the Clear Thinking Podcast.
Hey, Spencer, great to be here.
So a lot of people have heard about how to give away their money to help the world, right? You could give it to effective charities that do more good for the dollar. But a much less common conversation people have is about how to do good in their career, right? How do they help the world? Now, not everyone is in a position to do this. Some people are just looking for a job, right? Some people, their career, really, they just have to do exactly what they're doing. They have very little flexibility. But many people have opportunities to think about how to do good in their career, and they want to do so. And so that's what I want to focus on today. And we can really think about two things. One is, suppose you're willing to switch career paths or at least change your role. What are options for you there in terms of doing good? And the other thing is, suppose you really are fixed in a particular role at a particular kind of company. How can you think about doing good from that perspective? So let's start with the first thing. Suppose that you're willing to potentially change your career or substantially change your role. How do you think about doing good?
Yeah, sounds good. So I think this is indeed a very important path because a lot of good that you can do throughout your life, if you're really trying to maximize your impact, as a lot of us are, a lot of that, of the ultimate value you deliver to society will be with your time and with your career. So for those folks who are fortunate enough to be able to consider switching careers, I think this is a really good thing to consider. And one method I like to employ to do this well is to really think about the so-called counterfactuality of your career. And what does that mean? One heuristic I have is close my eyes and pretend I never existed on the planet. It's a bit weird, I know. And then really try to think about what would the world look like if I didn't exist compared to what it looks like now. And I think that's to the extent you can answer that question, I think it's a true extent, it gives a true test for the difference that you're actually making. So some people will close their eyes and do this investigation, and they'll realize that somebody would replace them if they didn't exist. Probably they're just doing a role that many other people could do, and other people will close their eyes and realize that that they're very special in their role, and so maybe they should stay where they are. But I think a lot of people, if they take this experiment seriously, and for my own case, I realized that I could have a lot more impact by switching careers. And this kind of heuristic has motivated me to switch paths multiple times throughout my life.
This kind of counterfactual thinking can lead to some really counterintuitive conclusions, right? So you could have someone who's doing a job where they're literally saving lives, like maybe they're a doctor's literally saving lives, but they realize actually they have low counterfactual impact. Like, for example, maybe they're actually not that good at it. And even though they are literally saving lives, they're actually bringing down the quality. And there are actually plenty of people who could take their job to go around, right?
Yeah, that's a great example. And it can go even further if you consider that even if they're saving a bunch of lives, let's say, maybe if they invented some medicine, which they're the only person that's able to do that, or the only person willing to do that, or they forge into this new area, they might even be able to save more lives, which would be even better than the lives they're saving. So yeah, it can get murky and complicated, but I think it is true what you're saying. For a lot of jobs, the actual impact is a lot lower than it kind of looks like on the surface.
And how do you think about replacement, right? Because you could imagine two different extremes. At one extreme, you can imagine a job where there literally is no one else to do it without you there. So if you don't do it, it will just go empty. And at the other extreme, you can imagine an extremely liquid market where, it doesn't matter who's in the job, because as soon as someone leaves, like someone else really qualified for it will just take their place, right? It's a filling those jobs is instantaneous, and you can always find high quality people to do it.
Yeah, I think that makes all the difference, and therein lies the rub, if you will. And so you want to seek out, if you're impact maximizing, and people have different considerations and goals they're going after, but if you want to have a lot of impact, then I think by definition, you want to seek out those areas where you are not replaceable, so that by definition, you're doing something that somebody else wouldn't do.
It seems like replaceability sort of has these two aspects. There's one is the sort of the market dynamics, like are there a lot of people willing to do the job who have the qualifications, et cetera? And then another maybe considerations about how good you are at that job, or do you bring something unique to it, right? are you above average or below average? Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair, and that's a bit tough. So I co-founded an organization called High Impact Professionals, and we measure our success at the organization by um, people switching careers, and we try to then seriously measure the difference that we've made. And the difference that we've made is a function of not only like how much difference did the course that we offer make in the person's switching, but also we investigate with, let's say somebody moves from a job to a very high impact job. We investigate that organization and we ask them, how much better is this candidate than your next best candidate? So if the answer there is like razor slim and very marginal, then we didn't provide much value on our own lights. But if the difference between them and the next best candidate is quite large, then we think we've made quite a difference. And so there, it very much matters how good the candidate is. We wouldn't want to place somebody who's not good into a role where we're replacing somebody who might have been better. So yeah, we try to take that into account.
And so when someone's done this kind of counterfactual analysis, if they're really thinking about their career in a kind of maximizing impact kind of way, what do you suggest they do next, right? So one way it could turn out is, hey, you know what? I don't think I have much counterfactual impact.
So yeah, at High Impact Professionals, we run a program that people can go through. It's a 6-week program called the Impact Accelerator Program, where people can join a cohort of others looking to switch careers, and you build a plan throughout this time to make this career switch. I've also written a book that's coming out next week called the High Impact Professionals Playbook that goes into a lot of this. So folks who are interested can pick that up. It has a lot of exercises that people can do to kind of just push things forward. But I would say, like most generally, having run the program at High Impact Professionals, we see quite a few pitfalls. So one thing that a lot of people need from the program that the program offers, but not exclusively, is accountability. So a lot of people say, oh gosh, I want to switch careers, but that's overwhelming. So one barrier for them to actually taking action is just having a sparring partner or somebody else who's going to hold them accountable to doing this change. One thing is imposter syndrome that comes up more than, I know this is a thing that everybody knows about, but I was very surprised by how many people actually suffer from this. So a lot of people actually just hold the oftentimes very false belief that they're not good enough to switch careers. And they just need some kick of motivation there. And other people just need to build a plan. So one strategy I like is making a weighted factor model, which is basically a glorified Excel spreadsheet with the things you care about. So I care about impact, I care about job fit, I care about salary, whatever the things you care about, put them into a spreadsheet, put all your options, and then just try to weigh them and see what comes up on top. And like, strangely enough, I've found that most people aren't surprised by the answer. They kind of already know what they want. They don't like do this and then something bubbles to the top and they go, oh, wow, I never really thought about that option. What more often happens is the one that they would have predicted ahead of time intuitively is their best option is already on the top. So it's a matter of, I don't know if people get confident with the numbers or if they just need to take this step, but I think a lot of people already know what their next step is in some sense, but it's something else holding them back. So those are some barriers that I've seen.
I want to go back to imposter syndrome in a moment, but on the topic of weighted factor models, one thing I've found when I make them, so you say, okay, here are the criteria I care about. Let's say you're evaluating anything. Let's say you're evaluating what apartment to move into, for example. You put in the things you care about, like does it have a bathtub? Is it a walk up? Does it have air conditioning? Whatever the things are, the space, the footage, and then you rate each of them on basically how good is it on that attribute, right? Maybe 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, whatever your rating system is. And then you can kind of also assign weights to the factors, right? So some factors you might care about more than others. You might say, well, the bathtub, that's not that important to me, or it's super important to me, right? Or the square footage is really important to me. So then each score on each factor can be weighted differently into the final score. Is that how you recommend doing it?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm happy that you went into the detail. I thought maybe I should skip it for fear of boring people, but yeah, that's very much it. The different weights and their scores. And you want to try to then really investigate in yourself, what are the different weights for the different things I care about? And I just said that, the top thing is often the thing that people already would have predicted. But also, I think there's like this good button test you can do where you say like, okay, if I got my number one thing now, and I picture I'm in that world, did I take everything into account? And oftentimes you might see that a factor is missing. You might be like, ooh, actually I care about this other thing. This scenario is missing that. Or, ooh, I weighed this one too heavily. That one actually shouldn't be on the top. So I don't think it's like the end all be all answer to any given question. But I often find this sort of test or putting numbers to things really helps you uncover the the different values that you have internally. So it's a good exercise to make progress in figuring out what's the next step for you, whether it be apartment hunting or your career.
Yeah, some people, they like to use their intuition for this kind of decision. Some people, they like a more structured process like a weighted factor model, and they think, well, whatever the model outputs, that's the thing I should do. My view is somewhere in between the two, that the weighted factor model is actually a great way to help you explore and improve on your intuitions, because it forces you to think about, well, what are the things I care about, right? You've got to get the different factors. It forces you to say, well, how much do I care about each factor relative to the other factors? And then, so it's forcing you to use your intuition a lot, but sometimes it actually involves research. You have to, go look into something. Well, I don't know how good this job is on this factor, so I'm going to go have to research that, which is nice. So it forces data gathering in some cases. But then also I find that when it spits out the final answer, sometimes you'll be like, oh yeah, that feels perfect. That's exactly what I expected. And occasionally it will be like, oh wow, that's really not what I expected. And then it allows for this recursive process where now you can go and say, okay, what's driving this? Why is this not getting the answer that I expected? Look at the factors that are driving the difference and say, did I misweight some of these? Or is this actually better reflecting my true values than my intuition? And so I think it's like, rather than thinking of it, you're doing this process and you're just going to trust its output, you think of it as a dynamic process involving going back and forth between the model and your intuition.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And as you said, it's a good mix of data-driven approach, but also using your intuition and checking yourself when the numbers don't look quite right.
And it's a really cool method in general, because you could do it for any decision, right? It's just a very general, powerful method. So
yeah,
I like that about it too. So let's go back to imposter syndrome. Could you just define it for those that haven't heard of it?
Yeah, sure. So imposter syndrome is the feeling that let's say you're in your job, you work with a bunch of smart people, and you think somehow you're an imposter in that space. You got in there by luck, or because somebody didn't look at your resume too closely, but that actually you don't hold a candle to these other people. You're not as qualified as the other people that are around you. And I think you could tell me better than I know this. I'm just surmising here, but I think smarter people tend to have this a bit more, if that's true. But if not, that's fine too. But essentially, I think paradoxically, it's a problem like the less imposter you should feel, perhaps the more you call into question your own intelligence. And so at high impact professionals, we've seen this a lot. And there's this nice dynamic in cohorts of people that come together and talk. One of the weeks of the program, everybody has a mastermind session where they're in the hot seat and they talk about their issue. A lot of people inevitably bring up something like imposter syndrome that's holding them back from their career switch. And then it's not that person necessarily gets the coaching they need to think, aha, within 45 minutes, I don't have this thing that I've had my whole life anymore. But what I saw running this course is that other people in the group see this very qualified person with a lot of degrees who has a very impressive resume, also has imposter syndrome, as being a signal to them that maybe if this person has it, okay, something here is off, and maybe the fact that I have it too is weird, and I should re-question if I have it. So yeah.
Yeah, on your question, I don't think that imposter syndrome is correlated with intelligence, but what I do think it's correlated with is how high achieving the people around you are, right? And so I think a lot of people tend to feel it when let's say they were a really high achiever in high school, and then they suddenly go to an excellent college where everyone around them is a high achiever and very smart. I think that tends to be like, oh shit, do I belong here?
Yeah.
And it can be, very, very shocking. And for example, I've heard of many people joining the effective altruism community and beginning to feel like an imposter for the first time because they just feel like they're really competent, altruistic people around them. And they're like, whoa, am I really good enough to belong here? And I think people with imposter syndrome often, they'll sort of second guess a lot of their accomplishments and think, well, that wasn't really a big deal. And they'll look at other people's accomplishments and say, wow, I can't believe that person achieved that. It makes me feel like I can never achieve that. So for those interested, actually, we have an imposter syndrome test and tool for free. You can use on clearthing.org. So I'll put that in the show notes. It can help you figure out if you have imposter syndrome. But other than learning that others around them may also have imposter syndrome, which seems valuable, do you have any other tips for people that think they might have imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I guess one tip that I think is quite good is the old friend test. So picturing that a friend is talking to you when you're talking to yourself, and then asking if you have imposter syndrome. Or you were trying to be as objective as possible. So you're in your own head. You're very subjective with yourself. You probably should on yourself. You're hard on yourself. But the idea, and you're probably less hard on your friends and more like charitable to them and the things they've done. So if you looked at your friend's situation and they had the credentials you have and done the work that you have, how would you invest? How would you like perceive them, and would you perceive them as an imposter? And the answer is probably not. So this is a tool that can help you try to get a bit more objective with yourself.
Yeah, because a lot of people hold themselves to a higher standard than they do the people around them. So yeah, I think that's great. Like asking, well, what if my friend had the achievements I did? Would I think of them as sort of a fraud, or would I kind of undermine those accomplishments, or would I say, no, that's really cool that you did that? So
Yeah.
I think that's really great. Okay, any advice in terms of thinking about what sort of career to go into if you decide you're going to switch? Right, you're like, okay, I think I could have more. I want to have more impact. I think I could have more impact in a different career. How do you, and you can have weighted factor models, but are there certain types of careers that you generally recommend?
I like a lot of careers in the NGO space for the reason that I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in the NGO space. So I think in the private sector, money is a very strong incentive for people to work there. So I think a lot of the most productive. I'm a very big fan of capitalism in the private sector. So I love that there are a lot of great products and a lot of new things coming out. I think they really help society. But I think if there were a billion-dollar organization out there that you could find that would really help a lot of people, I think there are a lot of people looking for those sorts of solutions. I think in the NGO space, this isn't the case. And one strong hypothesis I have is because the incentives are, in my view, very often the NGO space. So in the private sector, if you make a product and you think it's great and nobody buys it, you go out of business pretty quickly. There's a type feedback loop, and money's the feedback. In the NGO space, unfortunately, many organizations, they provide some benefit. They have some theory of change about how they're going to help the world. They're going to distribute books to schools in Nigeria, something like this. And then all they have to do, they don't have to find out whether education rates went up or health outcomes got better. In fact, those are very hard things to measure with long timelines. All they need to do is to convince funders that their project is going well. And the funders are not the recipients are not the beneficiaries of the organization. They're the people funding that. So you can get the funder to fund you irrespective of how much impact you have. And this is because a lot of funders aren't impact maximizing. They're looking for other things as well. These feedback loops are genuinely hard to get anyway. So I think there's a lot of, for this reason, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in the NGO space. So I think going back to the counterfactual statement I made up top, I think there's a lot of room for you switching careers into an NGO, starting a new organization, or joining a small impact-oriented NGO and having a lot of impact because nobody else is really looking there. So that's one option.
It seems like NGOs tend to pay a lot less as well, which may, if you're more altruistically motivated, maybe you're more willing to take a pay cut than people who are less altruistically motivated. So that could be another sort of reason for an inefficiency that you could take advantage of.
Yeah, that's true. That's another reason, and that obviously trades off with if you're donating, you might have less to donate. But I think on the margin, it's much better to have your talent in the space than your money, unless you're donating millions a year, something like that, which I imagine most people aren't doing. I think there's also a status thing. So people who are status seeking, for some weird reason, people would rather, like if you made an awesome video game, it would be perceived as higher status than making an awesome charity. At least in my view, most people would find that more impressive. So I think for altruistic people who aren't necessarily maxing out on status, this can be a good move too, because you can do a lot of great work, even if it's not recognized as such by the broader public.
Speaking about incentives, it seems to me that both for-profit companies and nonprofits have a bit wacky incentives, but they're different incentives. So on the for-profit side, one thing you point out is that the person using the product is typically the person deriving benefits, at least in theory. So that's nice. It seems to align incentives. At the same time, we see that there are plenty of companies who figured out ways to make money that don't seem to be benefiting people, right? So if they can make money without benefiting people, they can do that, right? Because the only incentive, like the only feedback loop really is making money. And so, an example of this could be making a product that's actually fake, right? So a supplement company that's saying, hey, this will give you good brain health, but it actually doesn't work. So essentially they're scamming their customers. Or sometimes this is done by benefiting the customer, but costing other people more than the customer. So an example would be a company that makes a great product that benefits the customer, but they dump sludge in the river and make people sick, right? So that's like a weird incentive. And then on the flip side, you've got NGOs or nonprofits where you have this funny incentive where it's like, well, to keep going, you got to raise money, but raising money from donors or whoever's giving you money, the government, whoever, is different than doing good. And so that's where the incentive misalignment lies there. So it seems to me they both have incentive misalignments. They're just different sorts.
Yeah, I think that's right. I certainly don't endorse every private sector product. I think there are many, as you say, there are many that are not, maybe on reflection, not good for people because they are attacking our lizard brain or something like this, where our reflected self probably wouldn't use that product, and there are other products that have negative externalities, like dumping sludge in the river. So I think there are a lot of issues, and even if you're staying in the private sector, you can make better or worse choices. But I guess on average, I think a lot of for-profit products that people find problematic, or I don't know. I think a lot of people are like anti-for-profit, and I guess I just want to make clear to the audience, I don't think you have to go to an NGO to do good work, and if you work in the private sector, that's bad per se. I think there are a lot of great opportunities out there.
Yeah, I find it more useful to think of for-profit versus nonprofit as a funding model rather than a determinant of what you're doing, right? Because it's really about, where does the money come from? Does the money come from people paying you for it because they want it, for example, or does the money come from people donating it to you, or grants, right? And in theory, for-profits and nonprofits could do the same things, right? But
yeah.
I mean, because the funding model is different, they often do different things.
Yeah, that sounds right. That's a good way to think about it.
And there's actually an interesting movement to try to create like for-profit style companies that are nonprofits, right? So that's a funny example where the idea is, if you can do that, if you can make a nonprofit, you imagine you could make a nonprofit, Starbucks, like maybe that would be really good for the world. Like, so yeah, it just kind of mixes those two models.
There's also an interesting profit for good movement growing, where for-profit businesses write into their charter, into their governance structure, we're going to give away whatever, upwards of 100% of all the profits of the organization. So they run a for-profit model. People have stake around the cap table, like have stake in the company, but nonetheless, they're not profit oriented, and their profits go to their nonprofit branch of their organization, like OpenAI originally, I guess, to some degree.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with OpenAI in the long run, but at least originally. And then when people are thinking about, let's suppose they're interested in working at an NGO or a for-profit company that they think they could have a high impact role in, do you have advice in terms of how they think about the role itself, or what they'll be doing there, or any kind of how to consider sort of the details of that?
It's tough because there are a lot of different types of organizations. But I'd say in the organizations I know, at least there are some areas where there seems to be quite a large gap. One is communications. A lot of organizations I know that I consider to be quite high impact need comms and marketing people. So I guess for some specializations, I'd say that there's an outsized opportunity. For others, I think it really just depends on the organization. I really think about this replacement angle. So if an organization is struggling to fill a particular type of role, knowing that seems quite important so that you can fill in that gap. If somebody's going to replace you anyway, then it doesn't matter. But I don't have particular advice about particular roles. I think a good way to get involved is to, let's say you're switching from the private sector to an NGO, trying to figure out what you think are the biggest problems that exist right now that aren't sufficiently being tackled. And so a lot in the EA community would say this is, there's a lot of global health opportunities, there are a lot of animal welfare opportunities, there's a lot of, in this burgeoning AI scene, which maybe isn't so burgeoning anymore, there's still a lot of opportunities to make sure that things go right. And for so-called bigger, existential risks, there's a growing community of people working on these problems. But I don't feel limited by any of those problems. I think, it's up to the listener to decide what they think is important and try to figure out, the scope of the problem, and then look at how many people are looking at it. And something will be more appealing if it's a big problem that's being neglected by society at large.
It seems like a consideration of their skills is going to have to be a big part of this, right? Because it's not enough to take on a high impact role. You have to do a good job at it, right? At least if there's someone else that might be doing that role, which in most cases there would be. So yeah, how do you think about that? Do you have people think about sort of what they're good at in some way?
They should, for sure. And I think actually effective altruists underplay this, their personal fit in an organization, whether that be due to their particular skill set or due to the things they like doing, which aren't always one and the same. And so actually, I would. I'm not sure how it is with your listeners, but I would advise people to make sure that they take that seriously. This is something I've seen effective altruists not do enough of, essentially. So they kind of downplay their own personal fit for the impact. They'll see a juicy impact opportunity and they'll chase it, kind of irrespective of how much of a fit that is for them. So taking your personal fit into account is very important. Yeah.
I'm sure I've said this on a previous podcast episode, but I have a funny thing that happens where when I'm talking to effective altruists, I'm often, and they're asking me about career advice or whatever, I'm often trying to nudge them to thinking more about, well, what are you really excited about? What are you really good at?
Yeah.
So more personal fit factors, because obviously the impact really matters to them, but they tend to have already thought about that a ton, but less about the personal fit factors. So I'm nudging them in that direction. Whereas when I meet non-effective altruists, but who care about doing good in the world, I'm often trying to nudge them in the opposite direction. Like, have you thought about what matters? Have you thought about what is going to make your work meaningful? Because they've often already thought a lot about the personal fit factors and less about, well, what's the impact on the world? So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It really depends on where you're coming from, and that's been my experience as well. Yeah.
What are your thoughts about starting your own organization if you're thinking about switching careers?
Yeah, so I think this is also a really impactful path, whether that be a for-profit or a nonprofit or whatever the funding structure is. I think by definition, if something wouldn't have existed otherwise and you start it, that can be really impactful. And so a lot of people who have an entrepreneurial bone in their body might want to test out this opportunity. And honestly, like in starting high impact professionals, I found it to be the most illuminating job I've had over the maybe 10 jobs I've had in my career. I've learned the most by far. I used to be a lot more like bookish and, I'll read a book about business to understand business. But I think I haven't learned, I learned way more running an organization than I had elsewhere. So even from a personal fit standpoint or a learning standpoint, it's quite strong. But yeah, if you're quite confident that what you create wouldn't have existed otherwise, I think that's a really compelling case for having counterfactual impact as well.
Yeah, it seems like it's sort of easier in a certain sense to get a counterfactual impact because you can do something that nobody's doing, as opposed to kind of fitting into a standard job role that's already there. That being said, of course, there's a lot of other complications to it, and it's hard in a lot of other ways. What do you think are some of the considerations someone should be thinking about? Do I start my own org? Do I not?
Yeah, one for sure is personal fit. So you have to be entrepreneurial. You have to deal with a really like blank slate, starting something new and creating something from nothing. And that will appeal to some people and not to others. You have to have a big appetite for risk, in my view, because a lot of startups, even in the NGO world, fail. I think they fail less in the NGO world because of this incentive problem. So if you're good at fundraising, you could have your org stick around forever. In fact, there's this fun fact about how the 5 biggest NGOs are like 100 years old. Some of them 130 years old, and the 5 biggest for-profit organizations are like, the oldest one is Microsoft, and the LLM, the labs are nipping at the heels. So OpenAI and Anthropic, I wouldn't be surprised if they overtake them in the next few years. But this points at this incentives problem of like, you can stick around if you're an NGO forever as long as you get a funding mechanism that's good. So in any case, but if you're impact oriented, you want to shut down if it's not working quickly. And so you have to have a certain appetite for risk for that. So people who are have that appetite should start a nonprofit or start an organization. And working in small teams, you have to do a lot of stuff yourself. So yeah, if it's you and your co-founder. If you're a mid-career professional and you're managing a big team and you're not used to tinkering with the lowest level of detail, you'll probably have to do that. So depending on how you think about that, that could be a plus or a minus.
Yeah, that's a good list. Another thing I would add to that list is extreme persistence. I think that most new entities, in order to survive, it requires someone kind of grinding away and overcoming obstacle after obstacle after obstacle with like lots of times when it seems like it's going to fail. And then they kind of go through one more obstacle and then there's another. And I think that actually most people would like eventually crack. It's sort of like the world's going to keep punching you in the face. If you ever give up, you lose. And then like some people are just willing to not give up.
Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds right. And that's tough. And that combined with the uncertainty of like, I remember starting HIP and trying to like high impact professionals. When we started, we were looking at people to donate money. So we had a totally different business model, if you will. And product market fit took about 2 years. We tried many different models of like getting an audience and testing something with them and seeing if the product works. And it's disheartening to see when it doesn't and like scrap everything and start over. So I found this quite difficult for sure. Also fun in a way, but yeah, you have to really be open to it not working out, to the risk of it all, to uncertainty again, to trying something new. But that's also fun for creative people who want to do something new.
Yeah, well, that also gets at the stress of it, right? It tends to be very high stress. Obviously, there's occasionally a company where just everything goes well immediately, and it just kind of, it's kind of blessed. But usually that's not the case. Usually, there's a lot of stressful things. You're putting out fires all the time. If you're, it doesn't mean that someone who's an anxious person can't work, can't start their own organization, but it's going to be particularly draining, if you're someone who doesn't take stress very well.
Yeah, very much so. But the upside, I think, with any sort of stress, I'm not sure I would endorse it across the board, but I think I found, at least in my own life, with a lot of stress and a lot of like hardship, there's usually the most learning out of that. And so, as I said, I think running an organization from scratch, I learned way more than any of my other jobs, because you have to do everything. You can't just, you have to react to a situation. You have to try new things. If finance isn't your thing, you might be the finance person because there's nobody else. You just have to learn things. And I think that kind of, not even just learning by doing, but being forced to learn because you have to act as kind of the upside of that stress. But yes, very, very stressful for sure.
Yeah, and the upsides are significant. I mean, the ones you mentioned, and another one is for people high in autonomy, you get to do whatever you choose, right? And that's, some people that's a nightmare, but for some people that's amazing. Like, nobody is telling you what to do; you decide what to do, and as you point out, it can be creative and very fulfilling. I would also say that besides science, which has had incredible impact on the world, a lot of the biggest impacts have come from organizations, right? So I would say that, like, sort of the upside, the possibility tends to be much, much bigger than working in most roles. Like, okay, maybe there's some exceptional roles at existing organizations that are as high impact, but if you think about organization founders, have some of the largest impacts in history on the world.
Yeah, I think that's right.
You also mentioned to me previously this idea of making yourself replaceable. What does that mean, making yourself replaceable?
Yeah, it's something I've been trying to do at my last few jobs. So I think one version of work is you get into a role, you're pretty good at it, and then you stick around there for a long time. And I think this can work in a lot of places, so long as you're delivering value. So if you're the CEO of a new organization and it's growing and growing, there are always new challenges and fires to fight, and I think it can be good. But in other roles, your role becomes repetitive, or you do the same thing over and over. And I think for roles like this, for me, I think something that's been quite good is to think about my counterfactuality like every 6 months or every year. So I don't like do any formal process, but I guess I just sort of think somehow, maybe in the shower, about how much of a difference am I making here, and is it still the case that this is the best option for me? So I just left my organization, Ambitious Impact, which is a great organization, at the end of the year, so a few weeks ago, and it was essentially a function of, I think I was there 2 years as the COO. I think I did a lot of the work I needed to do. I started new initiatives that I thought were the most important ones missing, so that those were sort of on the books, and made new processes where I thought they were missing. And I skilled up my direct reports to be able to do some of the things that only I could do when I joined. And so I think the difference between my value when I joined and my value after 2 years was getting smaller and smaller, to the point where I thought, okay, somebody else, if I disappeared tomorrow, it wouldn't be that bad. People could handle it. The staff is skilled up. I think that's good for the staff. Now they can do more things. That's good for me because I don't want to be anywhere where I don't need to be. As I said, I want to hunt out where the most counterfactual impact is. And I think this is a nice model of thinking about yourself. I brought it up with people. I don't know about you, Spencer, but sometimes you say things to people and they feel obvious to you, and other people are like, and I've said this to some people, and they're like, oh, but that's scary and weird, isn't it, to want to switch jobs or make yourself replaceable. I don't know what's driving it, but yeah, I guess that's always that always makes me feel like it's a superpower or something. And so in this case, I felt it's actually a nice model that I think more people could inhabit, and it seems like a lot of people don't. So for those lucky enough to be able to switch jobs and move around, I think this can be a good model, make yourself replaceable and then go on and do the next thing where you're not replaceable, so that you're making a difference again.
It's such a funny attitude compared to the way that many people think about work, where being replaceable is the last thing they would want, right? Mm. They want total job security where they can never be replaced. but obviously thinking about from an impact perspective really changes things. And if you could find a way to replace yourself and then that impact is now happening. You've kind of perpetuated it. Now you can go do a different thing and have even more impact. That's really cool. It's like you're creating impact on top of impact.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
All right. So we've discussed sort of career changes and how you could have an impact that way. Let's go to the other branch, which is, let's say you're going to be staying basically at your job fundamentally. What can you do to have impact that way?
Yeah, so I mentioned that high impact professionals did some other programs in the past, and we tested other things out. One thing we tested out that was pretty promising were workplace initiatives. So we would talk to professionals that worked at big tech companies like Alphabet or Meta, and we got them to run initiatives inside of the company. So one good example is a fundraising initiative. So at the end of the year, around giving season, when people are getting their bonus, or just thinking about giving back, or just trying to get in that donation before the end of the fiscal year, organizing an event inside of your organization that talks about, hey, here's effective giving, here are some great opportunities for you. I'd be excited if you donated. And this is actually how I found my co-founder of High Impact Professionals, Federico. He ran initiatives at his startup, and he raised something like 25,000 Swiss francs in the first year just through this initiative alone. And one number that goes around in the effective altruism space is around $3,000 for a life saved. So this may be like, and of course you don't want to take these numbers literally, but something like 8 lives saved just from this initiative. So I think in one sense you could say like, 25K, that's like pretty good, but not amazing. But if you think about it in terms of lives, that's like, if you jumped into a burning building and saved 8 people, you'd be like, holy shit, this is one of the best things I could have ever done. And he didn't fight against the grain, or he didn't like fight the powers to be. He just like brought it up to the CTO, and the CTO was like, cool, awesome idea. And then it happened, and then he raised all this money. So I think depending on the organization and depending on where they're at, there are opportunities like this to take advantage of at your organization. And it just requires a bit of agency and a bit of proactivity, and sometimes a little bit putting skin on the line. You're taking a stand. It's not the standard thing that the organization does. And so you have to like advocate for it. But I think in a world where, at least my impression, having worked now 20 years, I feel there's been a real shift towards power, if you will, towards the employee compared to the organization. The organization has a harder time finding great people, so they have to like give you more benefits. The amounts of benefits that employees have gotten over the years has risen, in my view. And this is because employers have a hard time finding great people. And so
Why would that have gotten harder over the years?
I don't know. I think talent has been quite constrained, low unemployment rate, perhaps. I don't really know. And this could just be like an N of one from me. But I remember it seemed much more like I was a cog in the machine when I started my career, and now it feels more like organizations have to fight tooth and nail to keep good people, because they will jump elsewhere. Maybe it's just a function of people switching every couple of years, and you want to keep the good people, and that's hard. But in any case, like whether or not you buy this thesis, I think it's not the heaviest lift to advocate for impactful initiatives inside of your organization.
So suppose someone wants to do that, right? They work at a large company. Where do they start? Who do they go to, or what are the first steps to get an initiative going?
Yeah, one thing we advise people is to find a co-founder, if you will. So if there's somebody else on board in your organization who likes these ideas, to not go it alone and try to find somebody to help you out. And then look for allies. So I think, maybe look for the most powerful ally you can get. And so this is like you don't need to draw a power map of your organization, but just figure out, who's on your team, who do you think would be amenable to these ideas, reach out to them. I don't think there's like a standard go to HR answer, something like this. I think it's much more like a build, strength in numbers, and then go to the decision maker with significant backing, like strength in numbers, essentially, yeah.
And what exactly would you recommend pitching them? Or maybe it depends too much on the individual cases, but like, what's an example that you would pitch them on specifically?
Yeah. So so going back to the fundraising event, I would say something like, always framing things. This is something that EAs get wrong, I think, in particular, although a lot of people would. Like not framing it in terms of like, hey, actually we can save a bunch of lives. There are these big problems, like a very rational analytic approach, but putting it in terms of the organization's interest. Like, hey, I know you're interested in retention at the organization. I think a lot of people are motivated to do this cool thing, and they'll think you're a better organization if you do this. So like, I don't know what the answer is for your organization, but trying to think about what the organization cares about, what they're going for, and then make your pitch, whatever it is, if it's a fundraising event, if it's getting, another thing you could do is get payroll giving so that people can donate pre-tax through their employer. Whatever thing you're advocating for, just kind of frame it in terms of the interests of the organization, and then you see a lot more uplift that way.
My experience when you're trying to get an organization to do something is you have to think about it at sort of multiple levels simultaneously. There's like the decision maker. What does the decision maker care about? Are they sympathetic to this? Would they be against this? What are their motivations? And then you've got the organization level, like, sort of everything has to be framed in sort of something that ultimately is good for the organization. And then you might have other people involved, like who, have stakes in it, even if they're not the main decision maker. So you kind of have to think about these multiple levels, like, okay, what's the pitch for the organization? What's the pitch for the decision maker? What's the pitch for this person who's, has authority, who I think would be really helpful to have on board, right? But there might be three somewhat different pitches, even though you're talking about the same idea. You're going to talk about that idea in sort of somewhat different ways or use different language around it.
Yeah, that sounds right. So, like, I think it's a matter of building buy-in by going to the first person and getting them on board in the terms that they care about, and then building from there. So you can say, like, hey, all these people are on board. We've talked about it. And I think the argument is a bit harder to knock down when you have so many people on board. I think also this can be different if you're at a small organization versus a large organization. Large organizations have the upside that they have a lot of finances. They often have a CSR department, and maybe they donate a lot of money, grant out a lot of money each year. But they're much harder to move, and they're more rigid, and they have processes in place, and it's hard. But smaller organizations are easier to move. As I said, my co-founder just talked to the CTO because there's 15 people or something. So he could just go to him, tap on the shoulder and say, like, what do you think of this idea? The guy's like, great, let's do it. But then obviously the amount of funds are smaller. So there are trade-offs there. And also in terms of like how you want to strategize about it.
Is it usually only successful at sort of a new program, or have you seen this work where it kind of bootstraps on an existing sort of giving program or some kind of fundraising system that the company has in place?
I think it's been harder to, I haven't seen it work in large scale organizations where a system's already in place, except for something like matching. A lot of organizations, at least in the US, I think it's less true where I live in Europe, but in the US, a lot of organizations have donation matching that people don't take advantage of. And so kind of like taking advantage of your 401k, which everybody should do if they can. I think, taking advantage of those programs, or you could tell other employees that those programs exist. Sometimes, the employer doesn't shout it from the hilltops because that costs them money. But that's something where you could do to latch on to an existing program and make it more effective just by getting more people involved.
Yeah, it seems like if there's already a matching program and people aren't using it, it could be as simple as just sort of alerting everyone, hey, by the way, everyone, there's this matching program. Here's what I give to, here's why I think it's really exciting. You might consider using the matching for this too. Where you don't even have to change your organization's behavior at all. You just kind of have to make people aware. Yeah.
Yeah, you just got to put yourself out there a little bit, and in it's such a light lift that if you get one person to donate a few thousand, that's already amazing in some sense. So yeah, I think there are a lot of opportunities out there like this for people looking for them and willing to take that little bit of a risk, if you will, of this is kind of taking a stand on what you care about, and it's not related to work. So I do see how people could say, it's a little bit weird, but it's only a little bit weird. Like posting something in Slack and saying, here's an organization I care about is like not that weird in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, it might be a little bit weird to some people, but also it could also make a positive impression too, right? People say, oh, yeah, you really care about this. You've thought about this a lot. Like it doesn't have to make your reputation worse, right?
That's true, yeah.
You could also run it by others and see, run it by friends. How would you react if someone posted this in the Slack? Is this appropriate?
Yeah, it does not matter. Yeah, I guess I'm reacting from. I remember talking to people about it, and they expressed this to me. I found it a little bit confusing because I wouldn't have found it weird, but I like anecdotally or empirically, I've heard people express this sentiment, so I wanted to speak to it a little bit.
Yeah, totally. And there also might be different organizations have different cultures, and that might affect how people perceive it. But, even if it's a bit weird, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not worth doing. So,
yeah, that's right.
What other advice do you give to someone who's, okay, they're going to stay in that company. They're not going to change companies. What else should they be thinking about in terms of impact?
Yeah, one example is of another type of initiative, not necessarily at your organization, is one person I talked to in the book. I have like different case studies in the book of different people who I think have been impactful in what I call the different pillars of impact. And one of them is one person worked as an agile coach in their career and went to an agile conference and then just kind of said like, hey, what if we do like make an agile for good, impactful initiative and pull together, I think something like 30 different people in the space. And now they go off in their free time and provide free agile coaching to organizations, high impact organizations who need it. And so they just pro bono will give them advice about how to like upskill them in this methodology. And so I think people can band together in that way. You can get creative. So, yeah, it doesn't have to be at your organization. Doesn't have to be.
So what's the generalization of that, right? So is the idea that you're gonna do a side project? You're still keeping your main job. You're doing a side project, or maybe you're gonna bring some of the skills at your work to help NGOs that you care about, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, it could be. It could be that you make it a side project. You can make a side organization. You could just do one-to-one mentoring with people, either as a mentor to a person at an organization, or as a board member. Another great impactful path is being a board member, which requires mileage varies on the organization, but it can be just a couple hours every quarter, and really provide. I'm a big fan of, and I've seen in my own mentoring, like the first few marginal hours are just so important because the mentor has so much to say that's unique. Like they tell you that stuff first. They don't tell you the things they're unsure about. So I think even mentoring people for a few hours can be really, really high impact and a really good use of your 5 hours compared to what else you would be doing. So yeah, I think there are a lot of opportunities outside of a job switch that takes some of your time, but not a lot of your time, to really help skill people up from like 0 to 50, where you're at like an 80, let's say, out of 100.
Right. So taking those in turn, so mentoring, how would you think about who to mentor, how to approach that? Right. I think mentorship is kind of a weird thing because it often occurs very informally. Like it's not like I choose you as my mentee, and now it's like it's sort of more organic most of the time. So yeah, just how have you seen that play out in a positive way?
Yeah, so I guess I would lump together. Yeah, there's mentoring, there's advising, there's consulting, and they're all a little bit different, but I'll lump them in one bucket for the purposes of this conversation. Mm-hmm. But I think analyzing, like finding organizations you care about that you think are doing good, impactful work, and reaching out to them just proactively and saying, I'm interested in helping people at your organization. Here's my skill set. Do that to 5 organizations. And one of them will probably take you up on the offer of mentoring somebody. So you're right. I think it's a little bit less organic than like it can be with mentoring, where you just met each other and you feel the vibe. It feels good. But I think this can lead to a lot of good, productive conversations. And especially, let's say, more on the advising side, I think they're at high impact organizations, there are often like repeatable gaps. Like if you start a new high impact organization and there's 2 of you, probably neither of you are a lawyer who's like an expert at nonprofit law, or you're not like a financial whiz. You might be, but you're probably not. And so for smaller organizations that are new and quite impactful, there are just like obvious gaps that a lot of professionals with specialized skills can just come in. And I think they'd be shocked to see that, the level that the organization's operating at, even though they're very impactful and very smart, they just don't have the skills to do some of the areas that a typical business needs to be covered because they can't hire for them. They're funding constrained. And so, yeah, reaching out, like identifying areas, I guess that top areas that you think are impactful and particularly like outsized impact, then identifying organizations inside of those areas that you think are really nailing the problem, and then reaching out and saying, hey, I'm willing to do X hours a week or month or what have you of advising or mentoring with your organization. Do you have any opportunities for me?
Yeah, at our organization, Clear Thinking, I found, sometimes people reach out and say, I'd love to help. And I found that it's way more likely to be a fit if they can propose some specific thing that they're good at that like could, be useful to us. If it's just like, hey, I'd like to help. Well, that's like very difficult to work with, But if they say, hey, I'm an expert in, let's say, this aspect of website development. I noticed that your website could be improved in this way. I could like walk your team through how to do this. Boom. Like, okay, wow. That's helpful, right? It's like a clear way to slot the person in for a particular thing and as you point out, the sort of the younger and smaller the organization, the more of these gaps there tend to be, right? And so like, yeah, if you could get plugged in with a group that like incubates new charities, for example, they might be able to point you even to charities that have these needs, right? Where your skill could slot in and you could help them kind of again and again and again solve the kind of problems that you're really good at.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's something I advise people. It's good that you say that for the mentoring case. I advise people to do that when trying to volunteer at high impact organizations. Another way I've seen a lot of people get into a high impact organization is through the volunteer path, as opposed to like cold applying, hoping they get the call back and there are just 200 applicants. It's just a numbers game and it's really hard to get through. But I've seen a lot of success cases of people emailing an organization saying something's off on the website. I'm a designer. I would have done it this way, providing value up front, showing that they've like taken the time to look at your organization and they're not just blasting to 100, and that leading to employment with the organization. So yeah, and funnily enough, I didn't consider that with mentorship, but I think yeah, the same sort of logic applies. It's a much more compelling pitch if you, the more specific you are, and the more you show that you're invested in that particular organization.
Well, let's talk about being on boards of nonprofits. It's something that I've done before as well. How would you think about that? Like, would you be reaching out to nonprofits and say, "Hey, I'd love to be on your board. Here's what what I think I could have to offer you," or yeah, what's your kind of advice there?
Yeah, I think this one also can be organic, but also doesn't need to be. So yeah, I reach out to organizations that I think are a good match for you, and try to yeah, I think it's similar advice. Reach out, say what you're good at, why you think you can provide value, and do that to maybe 5 or 10 organizations. And at least in the effective altruism space, I think there's a lot of need for great board members, especially board members who are a bit more outside of the EA ecosystem, and have more of a standard skill set that isn't super widely prevalent inside of the ecosystem. There's also that for EA organizations, there's the Good Governance Project, which I think is eagoodgovernance.com or something like this. There's somebody who matches up, an organization that matches up potential board members with organizations who want them.
Yeah, for those who never been on a board before, what should they expect out of that, right? Like, so say they do end up on a board.
Yeah. There's usually it depends on the board very much so. Some, and usually you should make the contract, even if, a spoken contract up front. But it can be anything from being an active member who kind of works on strategy with the organization. You might donate to them on the kind of heavy side. And on the lighter side, it could be every 6 months you get called into a couple-hour meeting to go through some things. That's the most formal version. But I think a good board member really holds the CEO to account and tries to make sure, they have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the organization goes well. So I think that's where the buck stops, making sure that to the extent you can from the outside, making sure the CEO is doing good work, making sure, especially for your area of expertise, if that's finance, let's say, that you say, ooh, this number, the budget looks a lot higher this year. Why are you making this purchase, or why is this happening? Checking the thing that you're good at and making sure that the organization is moving forward in a solid way. Yeah, so a few hours every quarter to half year, some meetings, and then you spending any time that you can to look at different documents and make sure that the organization is going in the right direction.
In my experience, being on boards, talking to board members, et cetera, I've kind of seen 4 different types of board members. And so the way I break it down is there's the big shot board members, which tend to be famous people. They're there really for name recognition, and they usually don't do anything, or maybe they'll come to a few meetings a year. And then, so that's one type. Then there's people really who are funding board members. Their job is to bring in money for the organization.
Yeah.
So they might be networking or calling rich people they know or what have you, schmoozing. So that's kind of a second type. And obviously that's a very specific skill set. It often involves a strong network, knowing a lot of wealthy people, that kind of thing. Then there's an expert kind of board member who's bringing a particular skill. And it could be an expertise just decision making, but it could be more specific expertise that's related to the organization's ultimate mission, right? So maybe they're an expert in a certain type of science that's relevant to the mission of the organization. And then the last type, which tend to be more junior board members, with less experience, would be more board members willing to put in a lot of time, and they become helpers to the organization of whatever the organization needs help with. And so they might be working a lot more hours, and that's part of the pitch. It's they're not bringing deep expertise on a particular topic or funding or a brand name, but they're going to put in a real effort and help the CEO, help the head of the board with whatever challenges the organization has. And so that's another type. And so I would just say, even if you're not one of the first 3 types, you could still actually potentially add a lot of value. Oftentimes there's work to be done, and the board needs at least one person willing to put a lot of hours,
Yeah, that sounds right. I like some of those. I like to be more advisors. I guess the board members hold votes for the organization, so they can like change course. They could fire the CEO if they get a majority. So there is a trade-off of like getting deep expertise is really good, but if they're like not value aligned for whatever reason, like let's say they're really good at science, but you need science for a particular purpose, and they don't hold that purpose, it can be costly. So some of these you want, I think sometimes you want people to be advisors, and they're essentially like board members, but they don't hold the official voting rights. So I think it's hard to like, yeah, you have to like hit some weird balance of you want people to understand the mission, but you don't want them to be like sycophantic to you. And you don't want just like people who say, yes, whatever you say is right. You do genuinely want them to challenge you if you're going in the wrong direction. So it's almost like not a good friend, but somebody who really understands what you're trying to do and is also like has the courage and understanding to tell you when you're off. And then, as you said, like there are these different archetypes. But I think like you also want to have like some level of alignment there. Otherwise, things can go haywire.
Yeah, those are good points. So you've given a lot of useful tips in terms of thinking about how to have more impact in your career or by switching careers. How have these ideas affected you in your own career?
Yeah, sure. So I think in some sense, the ideas that we've talked about and that are in the book are born out of my experience. I switched from the private sector myself when I was younger, so I worked about a decade in software engineering and had very narrow financial goals to make a bunch of money. And I thought once I do that, it'll be the Holy Land forever. I can go to the beach and retire and have drinks, and I'll be happy or something. And actually, when I hit those goals, I was very surprised to find a big hole inside of me open up and be like, holy shit, this isn't, I wasn't aimed at the right thing at all. What I care about is something very different. So it started a very introspective period of my life. And through that, I started looking at NGOs as a possible source of changing this. And then I found that they were, a few that I looked for here in Germany were slow and kind of not so quick as the private sector. It was kind of like my bias was before. The cliche seemed to be a bit true, so I was a bit lost for a while. But then I found the effective altruism movement, and there it was a really Goldilocks of people are doing really impactful work, but they're doing it really like the private sector and really like fast and engaged and making things happen. And so over the course of the past 8 years or so in different organizations in the high impact space, I've gathered these tools and I try to bring them to bear in my work. So as I said, I try to make myself replaceable and think about my counterfactuality in whatever role that I'm in. We didn't talk much about donating today, but I donate a portion of my salary to highly effective charities. I'm on a couple of boards. So I try to use the different, what I call pillars to impact in my own life and make sure that I have a good balance so that I'm having as much impact as I can have.
You mentioned that you kind of had this idea that when you make enough money, things will be grand, life is going to be excellent. But then you found that if you made that money, it wasn't like you expected. What was that gap between sort of expectations and reality? What was your experience like? Okay, now you had the money that you had wanted. What was lacking?
Yeah, I think a real sense of meaning. So I think, I played a game with people recently where you have to say like what you would do if you had $1 million or something. And people were like, oh, I would take off for like 5 years and I would do this and do that. And I kind of felt like, I think this was my perception too, that if I had a bunch of money, everything would be good. And, somehow I neglected all the other aspects of life. But what was really missing was a sense of meaning. Like, I guess in some sense, money like isn't meaningful, but it had meaning insofar as like it was a goal I was aiming at and it wasn't achieved. And so anytime you have a goal and you haven't achieved it, you can derive meaning from that. But for me, I was really a lost cause after this because I didn't know what I was to aim at anymore. And so I felt like I was floating in the universe without a purpose or something. And so it took a real discovery process for me to be like, okay, here are things that I care about. What philosophical commitments am I bound to? What do I think is true? What are my values? And I hadn't really called that into question before that. I had read a lot of philosophy, but it was always kind of high level and curiosity, but not really touching my inner values in a sense. It was just like a fun puzzles to solve. And then I really connected to what I cared about in this time. And then, I've been on this trajectory of working for high impact organizations ever since.
Yeah, maybe one way to think about it is that having money removes a lot of constraints, and those constraints are important that get removed, but it doesn't tell you what to do, right? It's
a very privileged position to be in for sure, but it's definitely wasn't easy for me. It wasn't like I said, woohoo, I made it, or something like this. Quite the opposite. Makes a whole new set of problems.
Yeah, it also reminds us that um, to derive meaning is about moving towards something, right? It's not the end state. It's not like, oh, I did this, I achieved this thing, therefore I have meaning the rest of my life, right? Usually
Yeah.
you have to be doing something, moving towards something. It's the process that generally gives meaning rather than the destination.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. So that process, combined with me understanding my values a lot more, has been really fruitful for me. And I should say, not even just in terms of impact, but working with like really value aligned people. So when I worked in the private sector, the programmer next to me has a totally different set of values and totally different set of things they care about. And so I had colleagues who were my friends, but I didn't have this deep resonance with a lot of them. But with people in the high impact space, wow, everybody's working towards the same goal. They care about the things you care about with a high degree of overlap. And that's really just like satisfying for you too, irrespective of the meaning. That's like another sense of meaning, the friendships and people that you meet who care about the same things you do, which is hard to find in general outside of that, at least for me.
Yeah, people are so much of what brings meaning to life, right?
Yeah.
So for those that want to go deeper, where can they find more of your work?
Yeah. So as I said, I'm releasing a book next week. It's called The High Impact Professionals Playbook. You can find it at highimpactprofessionals.org/book. It'll be on Amazon as well. Also, the org I co-founded, High Impact Professionals, has a couple of great programs that you can look into if you're wanting to make this switch. And otherwise, you can email me at devon@highimpactprofessionals.org. I'd be happy to chat to you if you have any questions about making the career switch or any of the other things we talked about today.
Devon, thanks so much for coming on the Clear Thinking podcast.
Thanks for having me, Spencer. It was great.